My name is Brianna Zimmerman, and the moment my entire life split into before and after came from a phone call that lasted less than 2 minutes. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, in my college apartment, laptop still open, staring at an email that didn't make sense no matter how many times I reread it. Your tuition payment has been returned due to insufficient funds. That sentence shouldn't have existed in my world. Because for 2 years, everything had worked exactly as promised. Tuition paid, fees cleared, no surprises. The college fund my grandfather set up for me had always transferred on time. So I did what any daughter would do. I called my mom. She answered like I was asking what was for dinner. I told her about the email. I asked if there had been a mistake, a delay, a banking error. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, calmly, almost cheerfully, "Oh, we took the money from your college fund. We used it to buy your brother a car. It's gone. You'll have to figure the rest out yourself." No warning, no discussion, no apology, just gone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry on the phone. I said, "Okay," hung up, and sat there staring at the wall while something inside me finally snapped into place. That was the moment I realized I had never really been part of that family the way I thought I was. But to understand why that phone call didn't shock me as much as it should have, you have to go back to the beginning. I grew up in Minnetonka, Minnesota, a quiet suburb known for its lakes, long winters, and the illusion of picture-perfect families. Our house sat not far from Lake Minnetonka. In the summer, neighbors gathered for barbecues, kids jumped off docks, and everything looked exactly like the kind of childhood people assume is safe and loving. But inside our house, there was a pattern. My parents, Scott and Carol Zimmerman, both worked demanding jobs. They liked to describe our family as busy but close. What they never said out loud was that closeness had conditions. From the time I was little, I learned that my role was to be easy. I cleaned my room without being asked. I folded my own laundry. I helped wipe counters, organize shelves, shovel snow. My younger brother, Dominic, didn't. If Dominic left his things everywhere, someone picked them up. If Dominic didn't feel like doing chores, there was always an excuse. If Dominic complained, the rules bent. On snowy mornings, when Minnesota winters turned sidewalks into ice, I walked to school alone, bundled up and careful not to slip. Dominic's school was closer than mine. Mom drove him anyway. "He shouldn't have to walk in this cold," she'd say. Chores followed the same pattern. I washed dishes after dinner. I vacuumed the living room. I helped clear the driveway after snowplows buried it. Again. Dominic might be asked to do something small once, and if he sighed or protested, it disappeared. Praise worked the same way. My good grades were expected. His average grades were celebrated. If I saved my allowance for months to buy books, that was called being responsible. If Dominic wanted something, money appeared. I didn't have language for favoritism back then. I just learned to be quiet. The one person who noticed was my grandfather. He came over often, asked about my classes, listened when I talked about books or ideas. He told me more than once that he was building a college fund for me. "So you never have to depend on anyone else," he said. Those words stayed with me. By high school, the imbalance wasn't subtle anymore. I took advanced classes, joined clubs, volunteered, worked part-time jobs around Minnetonka to save money because I didn't trust that help would always be there. Dominic coasted. My parents paid for his tutoring, his extracurriculars, his clothes, his entertainment. When he turned 16, they bought him a car. I rode the bus. I didn't complain. I just planned my escape. College was my way out. When I got my acceptance letter, a solid in-state university a few hours away, it felt like oxygen. Not glamorous, just far enough. The scholarship I earned covered part of it. The college fund covered the rest. For the first time in my life, things felt fair. College gave me space to breathe. Professors judged me on my work. Friends didn't compare me to my brother. My roommate, Harmony, became my first real support system. Those first 2 years were the calm before the storm. And then came that email, and the phone call, and the realization that everything I had trusted had been conditional. That weekend, I packed my bags. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't try to explain. I left. And I never went back. I didn't leave home in a dramatic way. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors, no final speech about betrayal. I packed quietly. I waited until my parents were out for the afternoon, loaded what I could into my car, and took one last look at the room I'd grown up in. It didn't feel like leaving home. It felt like closing a chapter that had already ended years ago. I drove back to campus with the windows down, letting cold spring air burn my lungs just to feel something solid. By the time I arrived, I knew one thing for sure. No one was coming to save me. The first decision I had to make was where to live. My apartment was no longer an option. Without the college fund, rent alone would destroy me. I went straight to housing services and asked for the cheapest room they had available. That's how I ended up in a single dorm room in one of the oldest buildings on campus. Thin walls, shared bathrooms, a narrow bed, a desk, and a buzzing overhead light that never quite shut off. It wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. Work became the center of everything. I maxed out my hours at the campus library during the day, then picked up overnight shifts at a convenience store just off campus. When events needed setup crews or maintenance help, I volunteered. I wasn't chasing extra money. I was chasing survival. My days blurred together. Class in the morning, work in the afternoon, another job at night. Homework squeezed into whatever time was left. Sleep became optional. Some nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating how many hours I'd need next week just to stay enrolled. Minnesota winters don't care about exhaustion. Snowstorms came anyway. I walked back from overnight shifts in sub-zero temperatures, boots slipping on ice, fingers numb even through gloves. The campus was silent at those hours, lit only by street lamps and snow reflecting back light. That silence taught me something. No one was watching. No one was keeping score. If I didn't show up, everything fell apart. I swallowed my pride and went to the financial aid office. Emergency grants, appeals, paperwork that asked me to explain why my family's support had unexpectedly changed. I learned how to say the truth without sounding bitter. My parents withdrew support without notice. I didn't mention my brother. I didn't mention the car. I didn't mention favoritism. I just stated facts. Help came slowly, piece by piece, enough to keep me enrolled barely. Food became another calculation. Ramen, peanut butter, free snacks from campus events. I started using the campus food pantry. The first time was humiliating. The 10th time, it was routine. Hunger teaches efficiency. Harmony noticed before I said anything. She'd bring back extra food from her meal plan, leave snacks on my desk like it was no big deal, share notes when I missed class after working overnight. She never asked why my parents weren't helping. She just showed up. That mattered more than she probably knows. Physically, I was running on fumes. Colds lingered for weeks. My hands shook sometimes from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I learned how long I could function on 4 hours before everything blurred, but I kept going because quitting wasn't an option. If I dropped out, my parents would be right, and I refused to give them that. Months passed like this, then a year. I adjusted my course load slightly, took summer classes, worked more hours when I could. Professors noticed my consistency. A few offered flexibility when deadlines collided with shifts. Not pity, respect. That was new. Then, almost a year after I left home, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was my Aunt Evelyn. She was my mom's sister. Neutral, careful, the kind of relative who didn't like getting involved. Her voice sounded uneasy. She asked how I was doing. I gave a short, honest answer. Then she said, "I think you should know what's going on back home." That's when the story flipped. My parents were being audited by the IRS. Apparently, the way they withdrew the college fund triggered red flags, improper reporting, missing documentation, penalties stacking fast. Then came the second blow. Dominic had wrecked the new car. Not a small accident. Totaled. Insurance premiums spiked. Replacement costs piled on. Stress seeped into everything. My aunt didn't say karma. She didn't have to. A few days later, the messages started. From my mom. "Can we talk? Things are hard right now. We miss you." Then my dad. A voicemail about how Dominic was struggling. how family should stick together. Then Dominic himself. I know things ended badly. I'm not doing great. I wish we could talk. The pattern was familiar. Now that things were falling apart, they remembered I existed. The requests grew more specific. Hints about money. Mentions of bills. Talk about how my help could ease the pressure. No one apologized. No one acknowledged what they'd done. They just assumed I would step back into the role I'd always played. The responsible one, the fixer, the emotional shock absorber. I kept my responses short, polite, non-committal, and every time I hung up, I felt something shift. Not guilt, clarity. For the first time, I saw the full shape of the pattern. When I struggled, I was capable. When they struggled, I was family. That realization hit harder than the phone call ever had. I finished my last semester exhausted but standing. Graduation felt surreal. No parents in the crowd. No family photos. Just harmony cheering like it mattered. Because it did. I walked across that stage knowing something important. I had survived them. And now, I needed to decide what came next. Graduation didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a checkpoint. I had a degree in my hands, a resume that reflected years of discipline, and exactly zero desire to be pulled back into the same family dynamics that had nearly broken me. But the calls didn't stop. My parents didn't suddenly become reflective. They didn't ask how I survived. They didn't apologize. They just reframed the story. Now they were stressed. Now Dominic was struggling. Now the family needed to heal. And every time they said heal, what they meant was help us. That's when I made the decision to stop guessing and start getting facts. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. Not to sue, not to punish, just to understand what had actually been done to me. The attorney specialized in family trusts and estate issues. His office was quiet, neutral, professional, everything my childhood arguments were not. I laid everything out calmly. The college fund, my grandfather's intent, the sudden withdrawal, the financial fallout that forced me into survival mode. I showed him emails from my grandfather, notes where he explicitly said the money was meant for my education. Not a suggestion, a purpose. The lawyer listened carefully. Then he said something that changed how I saw everything. Your parents may have had access, he said, but that doesn't mean they had moral or fiduciary immunity. He explained that while the account structure gave them withdrawal authority, there was a strong argument for breach of fiduciary duty, especially regarding the portion explicitly earmarked by my grandfather. He also explained something else. The IRS audit wasn't random. Withdrawals like that large, sudden, poorly reported tend to cascade. Penalties, interest, scrutiny. What they did hadn't just hurt me. It destabilized them. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady. I asked what my options were. A lawsuit was possible. Long, draining, emotionally expensive. But there was another path, a formal letter. Certified, documented, clear. A letter that established boundaries, acknowledged the misuse, and formally removed me from any expectation of involvement, financial or emotional, moving forward. That option felt right. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for closure with teeth. With the lawyer's help, I drafted the letter. It stated facts only. The purpose of the fund, the withdrawal, the consequences. It clarified that I would not assist with any financial fallout, audits, penalties, or family recovery efforts. It didn't insult, it didn't threaten, it didn't beg. It closed the door. I mailed it, certified, return receipt requested. Then I waited. No apology came. No accountability, just silence. And somehow, that silence said everything. That's when I made the hardest move of all. I blocked them. Every number, every email, every social account. I told mutual contacts politely that I didn't want updates passed along. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. Weeks passed. Then months. News still reached me indirectly. My parents sold the house in Minnetonka. Downsized hard. Moved somewhere quieter, cheaper. The audit penalties kept growing. Dominic didn't bounce back the way they hoped. Without constant cushioning, reality hit him fast. Insurance rates, limited options, responsibility he'd never practiced carrying. For once, I wasn't the one absorbing the consequences. I was watching them from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This was the cost of choices they made repeatedly. And this time, I wasn't paying it. I focused on my own life. I accepted a full-time job offer tied to my degree. Nothing flashy, stable, honest, mine. I built routines that didn't revolve around crisis. Sleep. Work. Friends who showed up without conditions. For the first time, my energy went toward building instead of surviving. And something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling angry. Not because what they did was okay, but because I finally understood that walking away wasn't weakness. It was self-respect. Distance changes perspective. When you're no longer inside the chaos, you stop mistaking urgency for importance. The more time passed, the quieter my life became, and that quiet felt like relief. I moved into a small apartment closer to work. Nothing fancy, clean lines, light through the windows in the morning. A place where no one expected anything from me except rent on time. I built routines that belonged to me. Morning coffee without checking my phone for emergencies. Evenings that didn't revolve around solving someone else's problem. Weekends where rest wasn't something I had to earn. The job grew into stability. Stability turned into confidence. Confidence into choices. I started saving. Slowly. Intentionally. I learned what it felt like to plan a future that didn't depend on anyone else keeping their word. Every once in a while, updates reached me through people who didn't know they were crossing a boundary. My parents were still struggling financially. The audit never fully went away. The downsizing hadn't fixed what years of poor decisions had compounded. Dominic bounced between jobs, lived with consequences he wasn't prepared for. The safety net had holes now. I didn't feel triumphant hearing any of it. I felt resolved. Because karma doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it just shows up as reality. And reality is relentless. What surprised me most wasn't how little I missed them. It was how much energy I suddenly had. When you stop pouring yourself into people who never pour back, life opens up. I made friends who knew me as I was, not as a role. I dated slowly, carefully, without trying to prove anything. I invested in my health, my mind, my peace. I stopped apologizing for choosing myself. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found an email from my grandfather I'd saved years ago. It was short. I want you to have options, and I want you to know you never owe anyone your future. I sat with that for a long time, because in the end, his gift wasn't the money. It was the permission. If you're listening to this and something in my story feels uncomfortably familiar, hear this clearly. Being the strong one doesn't mean being expendable. Being capable doesn't mean being responsible for everyone else's choices. And walking away from people who repeatedly choose themselves over you isn't cruelty. It's clarity. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped sacrificing myself to keep their version of peace intact. And once I did, everything else fell into place. Not perfectly, but honestly, and that made all the difference.